Complete Jewish Bible, Anti-Jewish Scriptural Interpretations. Some scholars trace modern anti-Semitism to misinterpretations of some of the words in the New Testament. While it is true that anti-Semitism does exist, it is inaccurate to assert that it finds its origins in the writings of God's emissaries or apostles. Although the New Testament records an often hostile Jewish family debate, which has been misused for anti-Semitic purposes, if we correctly read it within its proper framework, we can easily identify its Jewishness. Through a correct understanding of history and biblical hermeneutics, the reader of the New Testament will find an evolution of Israel, Judaism, and Torah observance. Anti-Jewish scriptural interpretations, Yaakov and Christian anti-Semitism in Genesis 25:19 through 23. Genesis 25:19 through 23 describes Rebekah, wife of Isaac, like Sarah before her, as barren. In the ancient Near East, barrenness was seen as an affliction or even a curse from God. So verse 21 says that Isaac prayed to Adonai on behalf of his wife because she was childless. Adonai heeded his prayer, and Rebekah became pregnant with twins. The first, Esau, the younger, and Jacob. And the younger Jacob. Esau came from the womb first, and grabbing his heel, Jacob came second. Some scholarship has presented Jacob in a considerably negative light. The Genesis Hebrew Chaldean lexicon translate Jacob as taking hold of the heel, supplanter, or layer of snares, referring to the third partridge so negatively lays the groundwork for future anti-Semitism. However, when looking at Jacob, or Yaakov's, from another perspective, a different image emerges. Clearly as recorded in Genesis 25:19 through 23, God made a covenant with Rebekah, Rekav, saying that the older will serve the younger. A message she passed on to her son Jacob. God sovereignly placed this zeal for the birthright and his father's blessing in the young boy. Moreover, that Jacob was hanging on to the heel of Esau should not be seen as sinful. It would have been natural for him to hold on to his older brother, sensing that he was now leaving the womb where they both had so comfortably developed. Add to this the fact that the expression that sounds so critical of Jacob is better translated, "May God be at your heels," meaning, "May God be your rear guard." The negative attitude towards Jacob came from Esau, who, in telling his father what happened, said that Jacob had supplanted me these 2 times. He took away my birthright, and here now he has taken away my blessing, in Genesis 27:36. Naturally, this older brother was bitter about what God had ordained and how he himself had allowed this to happen. Now he was blaming his brother, but the Bible does not criticize Jacob for desiring both the birthright and the blessing, and neither should others. This should never have been used to promote anti-Semitism. Anti-Jewish scriptural interpretations. The Magi replaced the Jews as first recipients of the good news. Matthew 2:1 through 12. Despite the prophetic nature of Matthew 2, certain Jewish scholars incorrectly conclude that this is the first anti-Semitic assertion of the New Testament, where God chose the Magi, presumably Gentiles, or Magi, I'm not sure, over his covenant people Israel, in presenting the Jewish Messiah in verse 7. Jewish scholar Amy Jill Levine points out Matthew's 2nd chapter has been read as a foreshadow of the Passion, in which evil Jews persecute the righteous while good Gentiles seeking their well-being, in Farmer 27 through 28. Historically Christian theologians have mistakenly insisted that the term Magi was used as the name for priest and wise men among the Medo-Persians and Babylonians. These persons were supposed to be adept in that secret learning which in remote antiquity had its seat in Egypt and later in Chaldea, from which later fact they were often called Chaldeans. Kadesh Matthew presents Yeshua 107. Most Christian scholarship thus argues that the Magi were Gentiles and of pagan origin. However, recent biblical scholarship and archaeological evidence has proven that the Magi were neither Gentiles nor astrologers, stargazers, but in fact, they were Jewish sages. As noted by Kadesh, Babylon was still the place of residence for the majority of the Jewish community, even as Matthew was writing in the 1st century, 107. Of the origin of these Magi, scholars agree that they are linked to the prophet Daniel near 500 BCE, who in the diaspora waited for the time of the return and the restoration of Israel. Some have even speculated that these wise men came from a Jewish school that went back to Daniel's day, where the prophets looked to the heavens for the promised arrival of the Messiah. The star in the east was in fact a manifestation of Adonai's divine presence, making the arrival of the Son of Man, marking it. The Jewish Midrash, Adagat Messiah. This is a star of the Messiah, and it will abide in the east 15 days, and if it tarries longer, it will be of the good of Israel. As to the accusation that God providing revelation to the Magi is anti-Semitic, this is refuted in that wise men of the East were in fact Jewish sages awaiting the arrival of Israel's Messiah. Anti-Jewish scriptural interpretations. Exclusion versus inclusion, a Jewish reaction to a Roman army officer. Matthew 8:5-13. A Roman soldier comes to Yeshua in Matthew 8:5-13, pleading for the healing of his elderly. Yet when Yeshua says he would go heal him, the officer responds, "Sir, I am unfit to have you come into my home. Rather, if you will only give the command, my orderly will recover," in verses 8-9. On hearing this, Yeshua states that he has not found such trust in all of Israel and continues, "I tell you that many will come from the east and from the west to take their places at the feast of the kingdom of heaven with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But those born for the kingdom will be thrown outside in the dark, where people will wail and grind their teeth," in verses 11 and 12. Some interpret this to mean that Yeshua is teaching that the Jews are denied access to the kingdom, while the outcasts, the Gentiles, are welcomed in. But this is not so. It is important to first note that universal responsibility of Israel to the nations. In Midrash Ruth Rabbah, Rashi insists that in Ruth's calling as a convert, a ger, she passionately and wholeheartedly declared her faithfulness to Adonai. So when Yeshua declares that he had not seen such trust in all Israel, it is the reminder of all present of the universal call of Israel to be a light to the nations. Second, as the objection based on verse 12, Rabbi Barney Kadesh asserts that the kingdom of God is offered to Israel in the person of the Messiah. Now, the message was to flow out further from the original disciples to the larger Jewish world around them. Matthew presents Yeshua, page 107. Rather than Yeshua teaching replacement theology, in the words of Isaiah 61, 1-2 were fulfilled, he announced good news to the poor, healed the brokenhearted, proclaimed freedom to captives, and released to those in darkness, thus confirming that Gentile inclusion does not mean Jewish exclusion. Anti-Jewish scriptural interpretations in the New Testament. Is the New Testament anti-Semitic? Matthew 15, 1-4. Some Jewish scholars today perceive the New Testament as attacking the Jewish people and think that modern anti-Semitism stems theologically from the gospel and the writings of its emissaries, apostles. Although it is true that anti-Semitism does exist, it is nevertheless inaccurate to assert that it finds its origins in the New Testament. As Michael Brown argues, the idea that the New Testament is anti-Semitic should be judged not only by examining it historically, but also in light of the Tanakh and the rebukes that the Lord gave his elect when they sinned. Examples, Exodus 3:5, Deuteronomy 9:6, 31:27-29, Isaiah 38-9, and Ezekiel 2:3-4 and 6, also Ezekiel 3:4-7. Thus, Brown rhetorically asks, Why then are verses such as these not considered to be primary theological sources of anti-Semitism? Why is it only New Testament verses that are supposedly anti-Semitic? Why not argue that God himself, along with the prophets he inspired, was anti-Semitic? In stating this, it is not to suggest that God and his messages were anti-Semitic, but instead to insist with the words of Proverbs that Adonai corrects those he loves like a father who delights in his son, Proverbs 3:12. Thus, we must honestly conclude that the words of the Brit Hadashah are no more anti-Semitic than those of the Tanakh. Moreover, the New Testament records an intense, often hostile Jewish family debate that has been misunderstood and misused by Gentiles for anti-Semitic purposes. So when viewing the New Testament with its proper framework, one can easily identify its Jewishness. Through a correct understanding of historical and biblical hermeneutics, a reader of the New Testament will find an evolution of Israel, Judaism, and Torah observance. Anti-Jewish scriptural interpretations. Anti-Semitic and the Jewish leadership. Matthew 23, 2-7. In Matthew 23, 2-7, Yeshua brings criticism against the Pharisees, stating that although they sit in the seats of Moses, they nevertheless talk but do not act. They place heavy burdens on people's shoulders that they will not carry themselves. In the end, everything they do, says Yeshua, is to be seen by others, since they desire above all things the praises of men. Jewish theologians assert that this should not be seen as a conclusion. As noted by Amy Jill Levine, to observe that this is a caricature of Judaism, that the Pharisees were great leaders, that Hithel the Pharisee had much in common with Jesus, and so on, is correct, and it goes a long way toward decreasing anti-Judaism in the modern church. Farmer 31-32. In answering this objection, it is essential first to note the relationship between Yeshua and the Pharisees. In recent years, from the time of Louis Frankenstein's iconic work of Pharisees and Harvey Fox text Jesus and the Pharisees, it has been suggested that Yeshua was theologically in union with the teaching of the school of Hithel over the school of Shammai. This explains why he was so critical of the Pharisees. He was both psychologically and theologically one of them. It was not the Jewish leadership or the Jewish people as a whole that were the problem, but instead the legalistic observance of the Torah commandments and the hypocrisy of certain rabbinical leaders of which Messiah was critical. Once again, Yeshua was critical of the attitudes and behavior of some of the Pharisees, since he was close to this group. This criticism is similar to those of the prophets of Israel and should not be used to justify anti-Semitic attitudes toward either the Jewish people or their leaders. Anti-Jewish scriptural interpretations. The death of Yeshua. Matthew 27:25. What may appear to be the most anti-Semitic reference in the New Testament, the brief verse of Matthew 27:25 states that when Pilate offered the option of releasing Barabbas or Yeshua, the people not only chose Barabbas, but of Yeshua declared, "His blood is on us and our children." Some have used this passage to accuse all of Israel for the crucifixion of Yeshua and argued that they consequently deserve persecution due to their own admission of guilt. It is for this reason that all of Jewish scholarship is highly critical of this text, insisting that Matthew's record is overly anti-Semitic and has in fact fueled the flames of anti-Semitism for 2,000 years, which undeniably has. David Stern notes, this verse has been used to justify persecution of Jews through the centuries by Christians who presumed that the Jewish people had invoked a curse on themselves and on their posterity, and willingly accepted responsibility for Yeshua's death. But a mob cannot speak in an official capacity for anyone, let alone for a people, nor in the light of Ezekiel 18 can anyone invoke a curse on unborn generations. Moreover, Even if the curse is effectual, Yeshua prayed, "Father, forgive them. They don't understand what they are doing," in Luke 23:34. For a more forensic perspective, however, the accusation that every Jew in Jerusalem at that time invoked this curse lacks empirical evidence on any level. Rabbi Barney Kasdan states that although there is no denying that a particular group of Jews made this horrible statement, it was equally true that it could not have been the opinion of the whole nation. In fact, the place where they condemned Yeshua to be crucified was historically known as Pavement of Judgment, whose famous Antino Fortis complex served as a military brackets for the Roman soldiers guarding the Temple Mount and was large enough for only 300 people. Anti-Jewish scriptural interpretation. Judeans or Jews. John 1:19. About verses such as John 11:19 and others, there is some question as to whether the Greek word Dolai is in fact a reference to Jews in general or regional, that is, Judeans. When reading translations such as the King James Version and others, New Testament verses translated Laodonai, as Jews, can sound anti-Semitic. In other passages, such as John 5:16 and 18, the King James states that the Jews persecuted Jesus and sought to kill him. John 7:13 also states that no one spoke openly to Yeshua for fear of the Jews. However, that same word, Laodonai, in Acts 1:1-8, as well as in the Gospels, should in almost every instance be translated as Judeans, not Jews. When Jewish people referred to Laodonai, they were generally distinguishing Judean Jews from Galilean or other Jews. For when Jews of this period wanted to refer to Jews in the theological sense, they invariably used the term Am Haaretz, the people of Israel. This has been noted in both the Menashe and in the New Testament scriptures. Judean Jews were more committed than other Jews to the forms of Judaism taught by the two parties headquartered in Jerusalem, Pharisees and Sadducees, who included most of the Cohenian priests. It was these Judean Jews, and it should be emphasized, even they were only a subgroup, not every Jew, who spearheaded the opposition to Yeshua as reported by John. The unbelieving Jews, which is what they are explicitly called in Acts 17:5, are elsewhere called the Jews. But this term should be taken as a kind of shorthand for the disbelieving Jews. To apply modern sensitivities to New Testament times concerning statements about the Jews results in bad exegesis. So when examining the New Testament, one must be careful to discern which group Yeshua was criticizing.